There is a moment that happens in almost every operating room, right before the anesthesia begins, that most people never hear about. It is the moment a surgeon looks at two patients, the same age, the same diagnosis, the same procedure on the schedule, and already knows, before a single incision is made, which one is going to walk out of recovery in 2 days and which one is going to struggle for 2 weeks. Nobody tells the patient this. Nobody puts it on the chart in plain language, but it is written all over their bodies before they ever get sick. I'm Dr. William Lee, and for more than 2 decades, I've stood at that threshold. Before every surgery, I assess something most people never think to ask about: physical reserve. How strong is this person's heart, really? How well do their lungs move air when nobody is watching? How easily do they rise, walk, turn, sit back down? How much stress can this particular body absorb before it starts to break? Here's what almost nobody outside of medicine understands. Age on a birth certificate and age inside the body are two completely different numbers. I've watched a 78-year-old climb onto an operating table unassisted, cracking a joke with the nurses on the way up. And in the very same week, I've watched the 61-year-old need two people just to help them into position. Same decade of life on paper, completely different bodies underneath. That gap is not random. Read that again, because this is the entire point of everything that follows. That gap is not luck, and it is not simply genetics rolling the dice. In the vast majority of cases, that gap is measurable, months or years in advance, using signs so simple you could check them tonight in your own living room without a single piece of medical equipment. Think about what that actually means for a moment. It means the outcome you are heading toward, whether you spend your 70s and 80s moving through the world on your own terms or spending them dependent on the help of others, is not being decided entirely by chance, and it is not being decided entirely in some future doctor's appointment either. It is being decided, quietly, right now, by capacities you already possess or have already started to lose. Capacities almost nobody ever asks you to check until something has already gone wrong. And this is where it gets uncomfortable for a lot of people, because we have all been trained to think that aging well is about a number. A cholesterol number, a blood pressure number, a number on a lab report that either makes a doctor nod or makes them frown. What if I told you that number is only part of the picture, and in some cases, barely the most important part at all? What actually predicts whether someone in their 60s, 70s, or 80s keeps their independence, keeps their mobility, keeps the life that is genuinely theirs, is something far more physical, far more immediate, and far more within your control than most people realize. And here is something worth naming directly, because it changes how urgent this conversation actually is. We are living through a moment, right now, in the middle of this decade, where the population of people crossing into their 60s, 70s, and 80s is larger than at almost any point in human history. Advances in medicine have done something remarkable. They have added years onto the end of life for millions of people. But adding years is not the same thing as adding capability. A longer life and a strong, independent life are two very different outcomes, and which one you end up with is decided far more by daily physical choices than most people are ever told. That is the gap I want to close for you today. Today, I am going to walk you through 5 specific abilities, 5 things your body should still be able to do. And I want to be direct with you before we go any further. This is not a fitness test designed to make you feel bad about where you are right now. This is a diagnostic, a window, a way of catching the earliest signals of decline long before they show up as a fall, a hospitalization, or a loss of the life you built for yourself. Because here is the truth that sits underneath every single patient I have ever cared for, and it is a truth that intensifies with every year that passes after 60. The body does not fail all at once. It erodes quietly, one small capacity at a time, and by the time it becomes obvious, you have often already lost more ground than you realize. The good news, and I promise you there is real good news coming, is that almost every one of these 5 markers can be rebuilt. Even now, even today, even if you are reading this in 2026 wondering if it is already too late for you, it is not. Let's start with the one most people walk past every single day without ever measuring it: how fast you walk. It sounds almost too simple to matter, but researchers who study aging do not treat walking speed as a casual detail. They treat it as a vital sign, in the same category as your heart rate or your blood pressure. Think about what that actually means for a moment. Your pulse tells doctors something urgent about your cardiovascular system in real time. Your walking speed, it turns out, tells us something just as urgent, except it is reading from your entire body at once. Here is why. Walking, real walking, the kind that gets you across a parking lot or up a flight of stairs without stopping, is not a single system doing its job. It is your cardiovascular system pumping oxygenated blood exactly where it is needed. It is your muscles firing in coordinated sequence. It is your joints absorbing impact without protest. It is your inner ear and your eyes and the nerve endings in your feet all reporting back to your brain in a continuous, silent conversation, dozens of times per second, to keep you upright and moving forward. When even one of those systems begins to falter, walking speed is very often the first place it shows up. Before a diagnosis, before a scan, before you even notice it yourself. But here's where it gets more serious. Long-term studies following older adults for years at a time have found something striking. People who walk faster tend to live longer. Not slightly longer, meaningfully longer. And this is not just because faster walkers happen to be healthier in some other unrelated way. Researchers have controlled for other health conditions, and the relationship holds. Walking speed itself carries independent weight in predicting how the rest of your story unfolds. There is a number worth knowing here, and I want you to actually picture it rather than just read it. A comfortable walking pace of roughly 3 feet per second or faster is consistently associated with better health outcomes over time. Fall meaningfully below that pace, and the data shows a correlated rise in the risk of complications down the road. Everything from hospitalizations to loss of independent living. This is not a punishment, it is information. And information, once you have it, is something you can act on. Picture two people crossing the same street. One moves with an easy, confident stride, covering the distance well within the time the crosswalk signal allows. The other hesitates at the curb, takes shorter steps, and is still in the middle of the intersection when the signal changes. From the outside, this looks like nothing more than a small difference in pace. From inside a research database tracking thousands of older adults over years, that difference is a data point with real weight attached to it, one that shows up again and again when researchers look at who remains independent and who does not. So here is the encouraging part, and I want you to sit with this before we escalate further, because this is a pattern you are going to see repeat across every single ability on this list. Walking speed is trainable. It is not fixed. It is not a life sentence handed down at 60 and locked in place forever. Regular walking, especially the kind where you deliberately push your pace for short intervals and then recover, has been shown to measurably improve walking speed over time, even in people who have not exercised seriously in years. Your body is listening. It responds when you give it a reason to. Now let's move to something that surprises almost everyone I mention it to. Something so small and specific it feels like it should not matter, and yet it might be one of the most quietly powerful predictors we have. Your grip strength. Think about that for a second. The strength in your hand. Not your legs, not your heart, not your lungs, your hand. It sounds almost absurd that squeezing a device as hard as you can could tell a physician anything meaningful about your overall trajectory. But here is where everything changes, because grip strength is not really about your hand at all. It is a proxy, a stand-in, for something much bigger. Your overall muscle strength and what researchers call your physiological reserve. The depth of physical capacity your body is holding in the tank for when you actually need it. Grip strength correlates closely with the strength of the large muscle groups throughout your entire body, and the research connecting it to real-world outcomes is not subtle. Low grip strength has been linked, in study after study, to a higher risk of falls, to slower recovery after illness or surgery, and yes, to reduced longevity itself. Let that sink in. One of the cheapest, simplest, fastest tests in all of medicine, something that costs nothing and takes seconds, carries an extraordinary amount of predictive weight about how the rest of your life is going to go. Here is what most people are not seeing when they hear this statistic and shrug it off. They assume grip strength is just about hands, about opening jars, about minor daily inconveniences. It is not. It is a window into whether your body, as a system, still has the muscular reserve to protect you when something goes wrong. An illness, a fall, a surgery, an infection, the ordinary emergencies that life eventually sends every one of us. I think about the patients who come through my practice after a hospitalization, and how consistently the ones with stronger baseline grip strength find their way back to independence faster than the ones without it. It is almost never mentioned to them beforehand. Nobody sits a healthy 65-year-old down and says, This measurement in your hand right now may determine how quickly you recover from something that has not even happened yet. But that is, in effect, exactly what the research is telling us. I think about this every time I watch a patient in their 70s pick up a heavy bag without a second thought. And I think about it just as often when I watch someone visibly brace themselves before lifting something far lighter. That bracing, that hesitation, is not weakness of character. It is the body reporting, honestly, on a reserve that is quietly thinned over time, often without a single symptom loud enough to prompt a doctor's visit. But again, and this is the pattern I promised you, this is not a fixed sentence. Grip strength responds remarkably well to training, at almost any age. This is not theoretical. Something as unglamorous as carrying your own groceries instead of asking someone else to, using inexpensive resistance bands, or doing basic strength training just twice a week can produce a measurable improvement. Your grip strength today is not necessarily your grip strength in 6 months. That is entirely up to what you decide to do starting now. We have talked about how fast you move and how hard you can hold on. Now we move into territory that reaches deeper into the machinery of your body than almost anything else on this list. And it is the marker that in some research has outperformed even the risk factors we have been taught for decades to fear the most. Your cardiopulmonary fitness. In plain terms, this is how efficiently your heart and lungs work together to deliver oxygen to the muscles that are actually doing the work, whether that work is climbing stairs, carrying a suitcase, or simply keeping up on a walk with your grandchildren. In research, this gets measured as something called VO2 max. And here is a detail that surprises people. This is not locked away in some hospital laboratory anymore. If you own a modern fitness tracker or a smartwatch, there is a real chance you are already carrying an estimate of your own VO2 max on your wrist right now, in real time, in 2026. And here is the part that should genuinely stop you. VO2 max has repeatedly emerged as one of the single strongest predictors of longevity that medicine currently has. Not one predictor among many, one of the strongest. In some research, it has outperformed smoking status. It has outperformed a diabetes diagnosis. Sit with that for a moment, because those are two of the risk factors we have spent decades being warned about in public health campaigns, and cardiopulmonary fitness, in some analyses, carries even more predictive weight. Why would that be true? Think about what oxygen delivery actually represents inside your body. A body that can efficiently take in oxygen, move it through the bloodstream, and deliver it to working tissue has a deeper well of reserve to draw from when life gets difficult. Illness, surgery, infection, even the accumulated daily demand of simply staying active as the years add up. Every one of those scenarios draws on the same underlying resource, and cardiopulmonary fitness is the measure of how deep that resource actually runs. This is precisely why so much attention has shifted in just the last few years toward tracking this number directly rather than waiting for a symptom to force the issue. What used to require a laboratory, a mask, and a treadmill test now sits quietly on the wrist of anyone wearing a modern fitness device, updating week after week, offering an early warning system most previous generations never had access to. The tool has changed. The underlying biology it is measuring has not, and it has always mattered this much. Here is where the story turns hopeful again, and I want you to notice how consistent this pattern has been across every marker so far. Cardiopulmonary fitness is one of the most trainable capacities in the entire human body, at any age, including right now, including this week. Regular aerobic activity, brisk walking, cycling, swimming, anything that consistently and repeatedly raises your heart rate into a working zone, produces measurable improvement, even in people starting later in life than they ever expected to. This is not a closing door. It is one of the widest open doors in this entire list. We have covered speed, strength, and stamina. Now let's talk about the fear that sits underneath almost every conversation I have ever had with a patient over 60, whether they say it out loud or not. Falling. Balance is the ability that governs whether that fear stays theoretical or becomes real. And balance is not one thing, it is an orchestra. Your inner ear reporting on motion and position, your vision scanning the environment ahead of you, the nerve endings in the soles of your feet sensing the ground beneath you with every single step, your muscles making constant split-second micro-adjustments, and your brain in the background weaving all of that information together in real time, faster than conscious thought, to keep you upright. As the years accumulate, each one of those systems can quietly begin to decline, often with no obvious warning sign at all. And balance is very frequently the first place those hidden declines become visible, because balance requires every system to be working together simultaneously. A weakness in any single piece of that orchestra shows up in how steady you are on your feet, often before it shows up anywhere else. Here is the sentence I want you to remember above almost everything else in this entire discussion. A serious fall in your 70s or 80s is not simply an injury. It is one of the single leading causes of a permanent loss of independence. Not a temporary setback, not a bruise that heals. For a significant number of people, a serious fall becomes the dividing line between the life they had and a life that looks entirely different afterward. I have sat across from families in exactly this situation more times than I can count. A parent who is living independently, cooking their own meals, driving to see grandchildren, and then a single fall, often on an ordinary afternoon in an ordinary hallway, changes the entire shape of what comes next. Not because the fall itself was catastrophic, but because of what it set in motion afterward. The hospital stay, the deconditioning, the fear of falling again that quietly shrinks a person's world. This is why I consider balance one of the most underrated abilities on this entire list. It rarely gets the attention that strength training or cardio gets, and yet the stakes attached to it are, in many ways, the highest of all five. This is exactly why balance training carries such outsized importance, even though it often gets ignored in favor of more traditional exercise. Simple, low-cost interventions, standing on one leg for time, practicing Tai Chi, working through basic stability drills, have been shown to produce a powerful, measurable effect on long-term independence. And if you want a way to track this yourself, right now, tonight, here is one of the simplest tools available. Time how long you can stand on one leg with your eyes open. It costs nothing. It takes 30 seconds, and it gives you a real, trackable number you can watch improve over the weeks ahead. We have looked at how you move, how hard you can grip, how efficiently your heart and lungs work, and how steady you stay on your feet. Now we arrive at the final marker, and I have saved it for last on purpose because in many ways it is the most revealing test of all five. Can you get up off the floor from a full seated position without using your hands or your arms for support? I remember early in my career being genuinely surprised at how much this single movement could tell me about a person before I had even reviewed a single lab value. Patients who could lower themselves down and rise back up smoothly, without hesitation, without bracing against furniture, without needing a hand from a family member, consistently handled the physical demands of recovery differently than those who could not. It was not a coincidence I noticed once. It was a pattern I saw repeated across years of practice, across hundreds of patients, in a way that eventually made its way into formal research. This is not a party trick. This is a real, scientifically validated measurement used in aging research, often referred to as the sitting-rising test. And the reason it carries so much weight is that it is not really testing one thing. It is testing everything at once. Leg strength, core strength, balance, flexibility, coordination, all of it working together in a single continuous movement. In many respects, it is a full-body stress test disguised as something almost embarrassingly simple. And this is where the data becomes genuinely sobering. Long-term studies following adults over many years have found that individuals who could not perform this movement without using their hands had a significantly higher risk of death in the years that followed, compared with those who could complete it unassisted. Read that again. This is not about being athletic. This is not about acrobatics or flexibility for its own sake. It is a direct physical readout of whether your body still holds the combined strength, mobility, and coordination required for ordinary, everyday independence, the kind most people never think about until it is gone. What makes this particular test so revealing is that it cannot be faked and it cannot be shortcut. You cannot talk your way through it, and you cannot compensate with willpower alone. Either your body has the integrated strength and coordination to lower itself to the floor and rise again without support, or it does not. And that answer arrives instantly, without ambiguity, the moment you attempt it. Few measurements in medicine give you that kind of immediate, unfiltered feedback about where you actually stand. I want to pause here and speak directly to anyone reading this who just tried to imagine themselves attempting that movement and felt a wave of discomfort. Because I see this reaction constantly. If you could not do it today, or even if you are not sure, I do not want you to spiral into panic. That is not the purpose of anything I am telling you. Like every other marker on this list, this is a trainable skill, not a fixed verdict. Practicing the individual pieces that make up that movement, squatting, kneeling, pushing yourself up from a low-seated position, rebuilds exactly the strength and coordination your body needs to eventually perform the full test with confidence. Now step back for a moment and look at these 5 abilities together, not as 5 separate tests, but as one connected story your body has been quietly writing for years. Walking speed tells you how well your cardiovascular system, muscles, and nervous system coordinate under ordinary demand. Grip strength tells you how much reserve strength you are carrying in the bank. Cardiopulmonary fitness tells you how deep that reserve actually runs when real stress arrives. Balance tells you whether all of your sensory and muscular systems are still communicating in real time. And the ability to rise from the floor unassisted brings every one of those threads together into a single, undeniable movement. None of these exist in isolation. A decline in one very often signals early strain building in the others, long before any of it becomes visible in ordinary daily life. That is precisely why noticing early matters so much, and why waiting for an obvious symptom means you are almost always noticing later than you think. I want to be equally direct about something else, because I do not want this to feel like a purely reassuring, tidy conclusion. The uncomfortable truth is that decline, when it happens, rarely announces itself with any drama at all. It does not usually arrive as a single dramatic event. It arrives as a series of small, forgettable adjustments. Taking the elevator instead of the stairs, just this once. Asking someone else to carry the heavier bag, just this once. Sitting down in a chair instead of on the floor to play with a grandchild, just this once. Each adjustment feels harmless in isolation. Strung together over months and years, they are exactly how physical reserve quietly erodes. And by the time the loss becomes obvious enough to notice without a test, a meaningful amount of ground has often already been given up. This is why I keep coming back, again and again, to the same core idea with every patient I see. The body does not send a formal warning letter before independence starts slipping away. It sends small, quiet signals, and the 5 abilities we have walked through together are simply a way of listening to those signals on purpose, deliberately, before circumstances force you to listen the hard way. So where does all of this leave us? Standing here in the middle of 2026, surrounded by more health technology, more wearable data, more information about our own bodies than any generation before us has ever had access to, and yet still facing the exact same fundamental question every previous generation faced. Will my body still belong to me in 20 years? Here is the one message I want to leave you with, because if you remember nothing else from everything above, remember this. Longevity is not determined primarily by a number sitting on a laboratory report somewhere in a filing system. It is determined, day after day, year after year, by whether your body continues to hold the strength, the speed, the balance, and the coordination required to keep doing the things that make your life genuinely yours. Walking to where you want to go, carrying what you want to carry, standing steady when the ground shifts under you, literally or otherwise, getting back up when you fall, in every sense of that phrase. And here's the encouraging truth underneath everything we have just walked through together. Every single one of these 5 markers, walking speed, grip strength, cardiopulmonary fitness, balance, and the ability to rise from the floor unassisted, can be improved through training at almost any age, starting from wherever you happen to be standing today. Not someday, not after some ideal starting point that never quite arrives. Today, this week, this month. I'm Dr. William Lee, and my goal, the reason I do this work at all, is to help you stay healthy, active, and independent for as many years as your life gives you. Not just alive, independent, capable, still the author of your own days. So here is my question for you, and I genuinely want you to sit with it rather than scroll past it. Of the 5 abilities we have just walked through together, which ones can you already do with confidence right now, and which one is quietly asking for your attention? Because the difference between the patient who climbs onto that operating table joking with the nurses and the one who needs 2 people just to help them up is very rarely luck. Far more often, it is a series of small, ordinary choices made years in advance, long before anyone was watching, long before anyone thought it would matter. The 5 tests are simple enough to try tonight. Time yourself over a short, familiar distance. Squeeze something with real effort and notice how it feels compared to a year ago. Go for a walk and pay attention to how you feel afterward, not just during. Stand on one leg with your eyes open and count the seconds honestly, without cheating yourself. And when you feel ready, and only when you feel ready, Try lowering yourself to the floor and coming back up without using your hands, paying close attention to exactly where the movement breaks down if it does. The path to strengthening any one of these does not require a gym membership, a specialist, or a dramatic life overhaul. It requires attention, consistency, and the willingness to start exactly where you are, not where you wish you were. What none of us can know for certain is which of these 5 capacities will matter most for you personally, 10 years from now, when life inevitably asks something difficult of your body without warning. A grandchild who needs to be lifted quickly, a flight that has to be caught by running through a terminal, a patch of ice on a February morning that gives you no time to think, only time to react. We do not get to choose the moment our reserve gets tested. We only get to choose, right now, in the months before that moment arrives, how deep that reserve actually is. That is the uncertainty every one of us is living inside, at every age, in every decade, whether we acknowledge it or not. The only real choice available to any of us is whether we spend the years between now and then building reserve, deliberately and consistently, or spending down a reserve we never even bothered to measure in the first place. Most people only discover which path they were on after the test has already been given. In an emergency room, in a hospital bed, in a conversation with a family member about what comes next. My hope for you is that you never have to find out that way. My hope is that you find out tonight, on your own terms, with time still on your side to do something about it. Stay strong, stay capable, stay honest with yourself about where you actually stand today, because that honesty, more than any single exercise on this list, is where everything else begins.